September 1846, County Cork. The potato crop turns black overnight. Within days, fields across Ireland rot into a putrid mass. The stench is unbearable. Ireland's poor survive almost entirely on potatoes. When the blight strikes, 3 million people lose their only food. The British government controls Ireland. The Treasury controls relief. And one man controls the Treasury's response. Charles Edward Trevelyan, Assistant Secretary to Her Majesty's Treasury. Between 1845 and 1852, 1 million Irish die from starvation and disease. Another 2 million flee the country. Ireland's population falls from 8.4 million to 6.6 million. The food was there. Ireland exported massive quantities of grain, meat, butter, and livestock to Britain throughout the famine, enough to feed the population several times over. The British government refused to stop the exports. They called it economic principle. The Irish called it murder. This is how laissez-faire economics caused 1 million deaths, how the British Treasury prioritized free markets over human lives, and how an entire nation learned that in the empire's hierarchy, Irish lives didn't matter. The crisis begins in October 1845. Phytophthora infestans, potato blight, arrives in Ireland from North America, a fungus that turns potatoes to slime within days. The first year, the blight destroys roughly half the potato crop. For most of Europe, this is manageable. Potatoes are supplementary food. For Ireland, it's catastrophic. By 1845, nearly half of Ireland's population depends almost entirely on potatoes. The other half eats them frequently. A typical Irish cottier family consumes 8 pounds of potatoes per person per day. Why? Because the British colonial system made potatoes the only option. Here's the structure. Ireland is ruled as a colony. Land is owned by Anglo-Irish landlords, many absentee living in England. Irish Catholics, 90% of the population, are tenants. They farm land they don't own. They pay rent in labor or cash. The penal laws enacted in 1695 stripped Irish Catholics of land ownership, political rights, and religious freedom. The 1801 Act of Union abolished Ireland's independent parliament. Ireland is governed from London. Decisions about Ireland are made by people who don't live there. Irish tenant farmers are pushed onto smaller and smaller plots. By the 1840s, many families subsist on 1 or 2 acres, too small to grow cash crops like wheat or oats, just enough for potatoes. Potatoes are calorie-dense, nutritious, and grow in poor soil. An acre can feed a family for a year. So the Irish become dependent, fatally dependent. The problem worsens because Ireland plants mostly 1 or 2 potato varieties, no genetic diversity. When blight hits, it destroys everything. Meanwhile, Ireland produces enormous quantities of other food: wheat, oats, barley, cattle, pigs, butter, eggs. 75% of Irish land grows crops for export. These are cash crops, grown to pay rent to landlords who export them to Britain. So when the potato fails, Ireland is still producing food, but the Irish can't afford to buy it. They're paid in potatoes or tiny plots of land, not cash. The food goes to Britain. In November 1845, Irish leaders petition Lord Lieutenant Heytesbury. They propose open ports to foreign grain, stop distilling grain into alcohol, ban food exports, create public works for employment. The British government acts, partially. Prime Minister Robert Peel imports 100,000 pounds worth of Indian corn, maize, from the United States. It's sold cheaply to keep prices down. Peel also repeals the Corn Laws in 1846, tariffs that kept grain prices high. These measures help, somewhat. Deaths in the first year are limited. The Peel government, though inadequate, tries. Then Peel's government falls. June 1846. Lord John Russell becomes Prime Minister. The Whig government takes over, and everything changes. The Whigs believe in laissez-faire economics, minimal government intervention, free markets, private enterprise. They see famine relief as a temporary problem that the market will solve. Charles Trevelyan, Assistant Secretary to the Treasury since 1840, the highest-ranking civil servant, becomes the central coordinator of relief. He controls funding. He approves or rejects every relief measure. He communicates between London and Dublin. Trevelyan is a true believer. He believes in laissez-faire. He believes in self-reliance. He believes the famine is divine punishment for Irish idleness. He believes that giving the Irish too much aid will make them dependent. In his own words, the judgment of God sent a calamity to teach the Irish a lesson. He's knighted in 1848 for his relief work. July 1846. Trevelyan shuts down Peel's relief programs. He believes they interfere with market forces. If the government distributes food, private merchants won't. Better to let the market work. The Whig government implements the Labor Rate Act, relief only for the, quote, most severely affected areas, and only through public works, building roads, breaking rocks. The starving must work for food. The public works program is a disaster. At its peak, 700,000 people are employed. They're paid starvation wages, less than the cost of food. The work is hard labor, stone breaking, road building. People already weakened by hunger collapse on the job sites. And here's the cruel part. Trevelyan delays implementation intentionally. He wants the Irish to feel the crisis before aid arrives, to teach them not to rely on the government. By winter 1846 to 1847, Black 47, the blight returns, worse than before. 3/4 of the potato crop destroyed. Starvation spreads. People eat nettles, grass, seaweed. They boil leather. Bodies appear in ditches, mouths stained green from eating grass. Entire villages are wiped out. Typhus, dysentery, and cholera follow malnutrition. Disease claims more lives than starvation alone. In 1847, the government finally implements soup kitchens. By August, 3 million people, more than a third of Ireland's population, receive rations. The soup kitchens work. They're effective and cheap. Trevelyan shuts them down after 6 months. He believes direct aid breeds dependency. The Irish must be self-reliant. Instead, the burden shifts to the Irish poor law system. Local property owners must fund workhouses through rates, taxes. In the areas hit hardest by famine, tenants can't pay rent. Landlords can't collect rates. The workhouses have no money. The workhouses become death traps, overcrowded, disease-ridden. Families are separated. To receive aid, you must surrender everything: your home, your land. Entering the workhouse means destitution. Landlords, unable to collect rent, begin mass evictions. Between 1849 and 1854, nearly 500,000 people are evicted. Homes are destroyed, roofs torn off, walls knocked down, to prevent people from returning. Families huddle in ditches. Children freeze. The evicted join the starving. All the while, food leaves Ireland. Here's what's exported during the famine, 1846 to 1847. Grain shipments to Britain continue: oats, wheat, barley. 1847 alone, 4,000 vessels carry food from Ireland. Butter, over 822,000 gallons exported in 9 months. Livestock, eggs, bacon. Even in the worst year, 1847, Ireland exports more food than it imports. Historians have documented it exhaustively. Cormac O'Grada notes that Ireland produced enough grain to feed the population. But grain was a money crop, not a food crop. It couldn't be interfered with. Cecil Woodham Smith, author of The Great Hunger, writes, "No issue has provoked so much anger or so embittered relations between England and Ireland as the indisputable fact that huge quantities of food were exported from Ireland to England throughout the period when the people of Ireland were dying of starvation. The exports aren't secret. British troops escort food shipments to ports to prevent starving Irish from seizing them. Why didn't the government stop exports? Laissez-faire ideology. Trevelyan and the Whigs believed that interfering with the food trade would destabilize markets. Free trade must be preserved, even if people starve. There's precedent for stopping exports. In 1782 to 1783, Ireland experienced food shortages. The government banned exports. Food prices dropped. People were fed. The system worked. But in 1846, the Whigs refuse. Markets are sacred. Trevelyan writes that the Irish market is freer, cheaper, and better supplied than that of any country in Europe. He's proud of this, while people eat grass. The British government spends roughly £8 million on famine relief between 1845 and 1850. That's about £500 million in modern values. Sounds substantial. But consider, the British Empire is the wealthiest on earth. Ireland is part of that empire. And £8 million spread over 5 years for 3 million starving people is miserly. Private charities raise additional funds. The Quakers provide significant relief. International donations arrive from India, the United States, even Native American tribes. The Choctaw Nation donates $170, despite their own poverty following forced removal. But charity can't replace government action, and the government limits its role intentionally. Here's the British establishment's view. The famine is Ireland's fault. The Irish are lazy. They're dependent. They breed too much, Malthusian fears of overpopulation. The potato blight is divine punishment, or it's a corrective to Ireland's backward economy. British intellectuals write that the crisis is predictable and not unwelcome. The Times of London in 1846 declares that the famine will reduce Ireland's population to a manageable size. This isn't hidden subtext, it's published opinion. Russell's government sees the famine as an opportunity for social regeneration. Clear the land of small tenants, consolidate farms, make Irish agriculture modern, meaning export-oriented, large-scale, profit-driven. Trevelyan himself writes in 1848 that a social regeneration is taking place. The deaths are regrettable, he implies, but necessary. By 1848, Ireland's population has fallen by 1 million. Trevelyan calls immigration still in active progress. He sees this as progress. The numbers are staggering. Deaths, approximately 1 million from starvation and disease, 1845 to 1852. Emigration, 2 million flee Ireland. They leave in coffin ships, overcrowded, disease-ridden vessels. Thousands die during passage. Population collapse, from 8.4 million in 1844 to 6.6 million by 1851. Some regions lose 67% of their population. The areas hit hardest, the West and South, Irish-speaking regions, the poorest. They're devastated. By 1901, Ireland's population is 4.4 million. It never recovers, a wound that doesn't heal. The social structure shifts. Small tenant farmers disappear. Land consolidates. After the famine, more land is used for grazing, sheep and cattle for export to Britain. The famine breaks Irish society. Families are destroyed. Communities vanish. The Irish language declines sharply. The poorest die disproportionately, and they are predominantly Irish speakers. Politically, the famine radicalizes Ireland. It fuels nationalist movements. The lesson is clear. British rule means death. Daniel O'Connell, the moderate nationalist leader, dies in 1847, broken by the famine. His last act is pleading with Parliament to help Ireland. Younger, more radical voices emerge. The Young Ireland Rebellion of 1848 fails, but it plants seeds. The famine becomes a rallying cry for Irish independence. For generations, the famine is remembered as betrayal. Britain had the resources. They chose not to use them. Modern historians debate Trevelyan's responsibility. Some argue he wasn't solely to blame. He implemented policies set by the cabinet. True, but he shaped those policies. He advised ministers. He controlled funding. He had enormous influence. And his ideology, his faith in laissez-faire, his belief that Irish suffering would regenerate Ireland, pervaded the response. Trevelyan wasn't rogue. He represented the system. The British establishment saw Irish lives as expendable. Could the famine have been prevented? The blight itself? No. It was a natural disaster. The mass death? Absolutely. If exports had been stopped, Ireland could have fed itself. If relief had been sustained and generous, deaths would have been far lower. If evictions had been banned, families wouldn't have been left homeless in winter. Other countries faced the potato blight. None experienced mass starvation on Ireland's scale. The difference was governance. Belgium, the Netherlands, hit by blight, minimal deaths. Their governments intervened, imported food, distributed it effectively. Ireland was governed by people who saw intervention as ideological failure. Here's the pattern. When crises hit, the powerful set the terms. Economic doctrine, laissez-faire, free trade, fiscal restraint, becomes justification for letting people die. The famine wasn't caused by lack of food. It was caused by a political economy that valued markets over lives. Ireland produced food throughout the famine, but food went where money was, and money was in Britain. This is how famine works under colonialism. The colonized starve while their resources feed the colonizer. The Irish famine is an extreme case, but the logic is familiar. When economic systems prioritize profit and property over people, mass suffering follows. And those who suffer are always the poorest, the most vulnerable, the ones with the least power. In 1997, British Prime Minister Tony Blair issued a formal apology for the UK government's handling of the famine, an acknowledgement 150 years late. Memorials have been erected in Dublin, Boston, New York, Philadelphia. The diaspora remembers. In Ireland, the famine is called An Gorta Mór, the Great Hunger, or An Drochaul, the Bad Times. The names matter. Famine suggests natural disaster. Hunger centers human suffering, and suffering that was preventable. 1 million dead, 2 million exiled, a nation broken. The blight was nature. The deaths were policy. Britain had the power to save Ireland. They chose free markets instead. Trevelyan was knighted. The Irish were buried in mass graves. The lesson endures. Systems built on exploitation will sacrifice the weak when crisis comes. Ideology will justify mass death, and the powerful will call it necessary. This wasn't an accident. It was a choice. If this video interests you, or infuriates you, subscribe for more deep dives into the economic forces that shaped history.